I'm Cheryl Ann Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for those of us who still dare to want it all, who have big dreams and bold ambitions. I think we deserve to have a big, full life and the freedom to enjoy it. So let's design our next chapter together for brilliance, not burnout. Each week, I'll bring ideas, insight, and a fresh perspective to keep you growing into a life that feels as good as it looks. Brilliant Balance, your life, your way. Now let's get started. This is episode 391 of the Brilliant Balance podcast, and we are in week 4 of the Money Mindset series. Today, we're talking about why the smartest investment you'll ever make is in yourself. Well, I am so delighted by the feedback we've been getting about this series. I think we've really struck a nerve on a topic that is maybe more important than even I thought it would be when we started this journey together. I love knowing that you as a listener are feeling more empowered and more confident about your relationship with money through some of the things that you have learned here. And some of the really specific comments that we've gotten have been so encouraging. So thank you for listening and for really taking to heart some of the insights that you've gained from this. Today's episode is all about you. And in fact, why the smartest investment that you'll ever make is in yourself, which I think is a paradox for a lot of women who have been taught to invest in others and to sacrifice themselves. And here I am suggesting that perhaps an investment in yourself is one that would really pay off. But I believe it to my core, and I'm going to get into all the details in this episode. So let's get started. Today, my friends, we are talking about expenses and investments. So before you roll your eyes or yawn, this topic is our 4th and final topic in our finance series. Next week, we're going to sort of get back to other things. But this one was born out of a discussion that I had recently with my 13-year-old. It's just the perfect conclusion to this finance series, I think, because it really is the next frontier for most women. And so I figured, why not start early with my 13-year-old? So we were out for a walk one night after dinner. And this poor kid doesn't get a mom who talks about, the football game or the weather very well. There's always something big and deep to dig into with me. So anyhow, there are a lot of new homes being built around us. So we were out walking and there's this construction going on. And she was curious about the whole process of buying a home. What's the difference between that lot that's for sale and this half-built home with a for sale sign on it, which was a market home from the builder, and one where there's an existing house that might be for sale that you could buy. So we were in this whole kind of real estate education discussion. And she was curious about, what a house would cost and how that cost of paying for the house might compare to rent, sort of on and on. So I was helping her think through, in the context of this discussion, the difference between an expense like rent and an investment like a mortgage, like buying a home. She caught on fairly quickly to the basic concept that an investment is something that has residual worth after it's used. Maybe it even has increased worth after it's used. So, for her, it was this realization that, well, if you bought the house and you paid for the house over 15 or 30 years, at the end of that 15 or 30 years, you had a house to sell, and that got you a bunch of money back. If you had paid rent for 15 or 30 years, of course, at the end of that, there's nothing to sell. And so that money is gone, and there's no return to you for all the years that you have been paying to use that living space. It's a pretty basic concept, right? I'm sure most of you are like, okay, whatever, I get the difference between renting and buying a home. But it was a really simple way for us to sort of anchor into this concept of the difference between an investment and an expense. And then it gave us a framework. We sort of parlayed that into a discussion about other things that you might rent or buy, like a car, if you leased a car versus buying a car and the pros and cons of that. And then we started going through other typical expenses or expenditures and classifying them as, would that be an expense or would that be an investment? And as we went, I had this aha moment that I think our definition of investment may be a little bit narrow. Even as adults, we may fairly narrowly define the term investment and, really think about it as financial instruments. So again, remember, my poor 13-year-old is out for this walk with me, and we're in this rather advanced discussion at this point about economics. And I think she was probably very happy when we finally got home that evening. But now we're going to have part 2 of that discussion with you. So today, what I want to know is, how do you classify expenses and investments? If you looked at all the money that passes through your hands every month, which things would you classify as an expense? And which ones would you classify as an investment? Have you really thought about it lately? If you have, that's awesome. This is something I think we probably all should be doing regularly. But if you haven't thought about this or haven't thought about it lately, it's a good exercise to look at all the places that you are taking the money you earn. Where's it going? And in your mind, are you really thinking of those as expenses, or are you connected to the idea of which ones are investments? So when I say investment, most people think about traditional financial instruments, right? Stocks, bonds, mutual funds, retirement funds, things that are financial instruments where you put money in to an investment pool, you let it sit there for a while, and then you earn a return and you get it back, right? Just the word investment is scary to some people because of their lack of knowledge about the space. And here's the thing, as a result, women are way less likely to invest in traditional financial instruments than men. We don't invest as much, and we don't invest as early. So there was this survey done by BlackRock, and of all of the assets that women control, if you look at sort of the total portfolio that you have, your entire collection of ownership, 71% of it women keep in cash. And for men, that number is 60%. So still pretty high, but there's that 11% gap. And they're starting to refer to this as the gender investment gap. It's sort of a twin to the gender pay gap. So, why do we do that? Well, cash feels like it has no risk, right? Cash is going to be cash. We know what we have. But the thing about cash is it also has zero potential to grow. So stocks and other investments they have some risk, but they have potential to grow over time. So the purchasing power of that cash is going to go down over time, right? Which means it has an opportunity cost for holding it. So here was the data I saw. It was fascinating. If for women who are making, let's say $100,000 a year as just a round number, if you look at her opportunity cost of holding that extra cash during her working years, like say from 30 to 65, so it might even be shorter than her total working years, carrying that extra cash has an opportunity cost of about $1 million. In other words, if she were investing at the same rate as her male counterpart over that entire time from 30 to 65, that investment would be worth an incremental $1 million by age 65. That's significant, at $100,000 income. So I think it is certainly important to understand and play in traditional financial instruments as a means of investment. But it's actually not where I'm going to spend most of our time today. So I want to make that point. And then I want to talk about kind of my insight from this walk, which is these 3 other places that money can go that also has a return. It may have a slightly different return financially. It may or may not be as significant as those financial instruments, but maybe it's equally important. And it was this sort of twist in my perspective around investing that I thought might be interesting for us to get into a bit today. So beyond traditional financial investments, which again, I am absolutely underlining are critically important for women to understand and participate in. That's my point of view. If you're not playing in traditional financial investments, basically the stock market and other investment opportunities, it's really something where you want to get educated and you want to begin to play, because the fact that women start there later and play with a smaller percentage of their portfolio is hurting us. And in an era in which women are living longer and often living single, right? Because we're living longer than our male counterparts and the divorce rate is super high. Those two things together, it's really important that you have a level of financial independence that's yours and yours alone. But beyond those investments, there's these three other kinds that I want to talk about. The first one that really came to light during the walk was the idea of business endeavors. Starting a business, all the costs associated with startup, buying a business, like buying a franchise or buying a building, that you were going to lease, and then growing the business, all of the investments that go into enabling a business to get bigger and generate more revenue and therefore more profit. All of those things are investments. And, perhaps not surprising that it came up in this discussion because I own a business. But as she was asking questions about, well, how do you think about, the money that you might spend to hire a new employee or the money that you might spend on marketing in the business? What is that? Is that an expense or an investment? And it was an interesting discussion, right? Because those two things really should only ever be done if we think they're going to help the business to grow, which means there's a return, which means they're investments. So I think that whole notion of, investing in a business is often when I'm talking to women who are thinking about starting businesses, they are thinking about, and I quote, throwing money away. I just don't know if I can throw that kind of money away. Or they'll say, I just don't know if I can burn that kind of cash. Think about the metaphors we're using there. That is not someone who is classifying this as an investment, right? They are looking at it as, I'm going to burn this money. I'm going to waste it, essentially. There is a implied expectation there that it's not coming back. But what if you were very clear that, starting a business or growing a business is really probably the best investment you could make? Would that change the way you think about that as a viable path? So I think it's really important here that business endeavors are classified as investments in our minds when we're thinking about where we may want to allocate some of our earnings.
I want to talk to all my fellow business owners and introduce you to my friends at Mackie. They are experts in providing CFO services that give you the clarity and confidence that you need, not only to succeed, but to make those strategic decisions that transform your business. Listen, running a business can be stressful, and trust me, I get it. You always want more time away from work to do the things you love, but you also want more profit. And that's where Mackie comes in with their full-service financial, accounting, and executive guidance. With their Prosper for Business system, you'll have a trusted partner by your side, combining strategic planning, data analysis, and goal setting to help you grow further, better, and faster. And their results speak for themselves. Mackie's clients experience an average first-year profit increase of over 100%, and business owners report a 20% increase in time freedom. So start your journey to prosper today. Visit mackieadvisors.com/brilliant balance and book your consultation.
Second one that we talked about was education. And we sort of expanded this to talk about education as well as things like training and, certifications that you could get. So in her context, we were talking about tuition, right? When I was with my daughter. So the tuition for, a private school or the tuition for a college is an investment. And I think a lot of us would be pretty clear that when we're spending money on our children's education, it's an investment we're making in their future. Maybe you've gotten a real estate license or, like a Six Sigma green belt in the quality space, or maybe you're a PMP in the project management space. All of those kinds of certifications and training curriculums are, I think, pretty clearly we would look at them as there's an investment because we expect, our income may go up or we can get into a new field for having that education. But what about things like, taking a cooking class that makes you faster when you're in the kitchen and gives you the skills to prepare healthy meals? Is that an investment or is that an expense? Right? What about working with a health coach or a personal trainer? And that through doing that, you're able to eliminate diabetes and get yourself off of medications. Is that money that you're spending for the health coach or the trainer? Is that an investment or an expense? What about marriage counseling? What if you go work with a therapist or a marriage counselor and you're able to prevent a divorce and all the associated costs of the divorce, both financial and emotional? Is that an expense in the marriage counselor or is it an investment? So these are interesting questions, right? They're a little bit of gray area of what kind of dividend, what kind of financial return would you have to get to think about these things as investments in your future, in building a skill set or a capability that could improve your life, right? Sometimes these have a financial ROI. Like if you're able to get a degree or a certification that very clearly takes your income to the next notch, most of us are clear that that's an investment. It has a financial return. But what about when it has a lifestyle return or when it's a cost avoidance, right? We're able to avoid the cost of divorce or avoid the cost of diabetes in these examples. Does that make it an investment? I think this is really important territory to consider. So for me, these all came out on the side of investments. There is an expected return. It's not always purely financial, but in all of those cases of education, training, developing ourselves, making ourselves better, building new skills, I think those are investments. And then the third one, so was investments in your business, so business endeavors, education, certification, and training. And then the third one were experiences. How do you think about experiences? And I'll tell you the number one experience that comes up in the work that I do with women is travel. Is travel an expense or is it an investment? There's other ones. Like if you think about sending your child to a camp experience, maybe in the summer, maybe you send them to, 3 weeks of a sleepaway camp where they just come back like transformed. When I was in junior high, I went to a 3-week overnight camp on a college campus. It was a life-altering experience, really one of those transitional moments I look back on in my life and say, I did not come home from that the same person that I went as, right? So many doors were opened, so many worlds were open to me about what was possible and what my future might look like by being in this intensive experience with other kids who were like me. It was just a really extraordinary moment. So a camp like that, when my parents made the decision to send me to that camp, was that an expense? Or was it an investment? I would argue the return on it has been extraordinary. What about things like the arts? Getting to go to, a theater production or a musical production or going to an art exhibit. Is that an expense or is it an investment? So I think these are the types of expenditures that are often viewed as frivolous. Right? We think about them as like luxuries, travel and events and, participation in the arts. And we use those same kind of terms I referenced before, like, oh, I'm blowing money on this, or I just don't have, $3,000 to throw away. Well, when we classify those types of experiences in sort of the expense bucket, the same way that we would, something that we're just going to consume and not have any residual worth from afterwards. We're barely even going to remember that it happened. It seems like an unfair comparison because some of these experiences have such an enormous return over our lifetime. Travel is one that changes people. The experiences that we have when we're in other parts of the country, other parts of the world, other types of geography expand our worldview. They're expansive experiences that keep us in possibility. That is an investment that is worth making. So in all of these, just like traditional investment vehicles, of course you want to assess the risk and the return. You want to do your homework. But when the risk is low or when it can be offset, and when the value to you is high, when you can see what's possible on the other side of that business investment, of that experience that you might want to have, of that education or that training or that skill that you're going to build, then you want to lean into those expenditures because they have worth. They have worth that goes beyond the period that you're on the trip. My husband and I went to Italy before our oldest daughter was born. When I can't tell you how many times I think back on that trip and how many little pieces and elements of it kind of had this fractal experience that has shown up over and over again in the years since, and that was 14 years ago. So that is an experience that is still having a return, right? There are still elements of my life that are richer today for having been there. I think that's worth thinking about, worth talking about. It's a little bit non-traditional. So I'm certainly not saying that all of these things have a financial return. They don't, but they have a return to your life. And some of them will indeed have a financial return. The business in particular, some of those education and certifications and trainings and skill buildings, many of those can in fact have a financial return as well. So I think the conversation I want you to be having with yourself this week is really, what is your confidence level like when it comes to allocating money to investments overall? How do you feel when you start to think about those decisions? Both the traditional financial instruments, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, et cetera, and then some of these other three that we talked about today, businesses, education, training, experiences. Do those kinds of expenditures scare you? Do you feel a sense of resistance to making them, or do you get excited when you think about them? Thank you so much for tuning in today and for sticking with me through this 4-part series. It's been a fun ride to dig into this topic with you. And as we close this series, I am going to get us back to a wide variety of topics from here forward. I am just grateful that you've stuck with 4 episodes in a row on a unified topic, not something that I do regularly on the show if you're a longtime listener. And again, I particularly appreciate the comments and the emails, the DMs that have come my way as a response to some of the insights that you are walking away with. So next week, we will be into a whole new topic to unpack together. And until next time, my friends, let's be brilliant.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.